All right, class. I'm finishing up here for reals. I didn't quite complete what I had in mind here. So we were picking up. We're talking, of course, about the mass society, and one of the ways in which the mass society, one of the sort of issues, persistent issues that it both wrestles with and I think highlights is the role of women. Because as we enter into this modern era, we know that the promise of documents like the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution and growing calls for sort of equality and equal opportunity and self-worth and dignity and so on and so forth is going to be taken increasingly seriously. And so we left off, we were talking about sort of the crossroads at which women stood as the industrial capitalist economy is taking people from their it's taking women more and more out of the workforce. How are they changing their responsibilities and roles within society? And both in the middle class and the working class, women have some fairly dramatic changes that are happening, particularly in the case of the middle class. Women are certainly the focal point of child rearing, and in many ways, women are, they sort of labor under this reputation of their virtuosity and how they will uh, transmit that virtue to the next generation. And then, of course, there's also this sense that if young boys are raised by their mothers, then perhaps they need to learn somewhere how to become tough, more masculine males. And so I mentioned in the last presentation things like organized sports, scouting, getting out of the backcountry, even preparing for military, so on and so forth. These were ways that were thought as important avenues to preparing young boys to become sort of more rugged and rough and tumble men in the age of industrial capitalism. In the working class, women are actually, we're going to see the working class start to have fewer and fewer children, partly because with improvements in public health and just healthcare in general, we're going to start to see a greater comfort even in the working class with the notion that infant mortality and children living to an older age is going to become more and more likely. So this all results in lower birth rates, and this is also coupled with the fact that raising a child in an industrialized society is quite expensive, and thus the term dependence, because this is how working class families start to regard their children, in the sense that they're burdens, they're expensive, we need to think twice before we have another child, because that child is going to come with a certain price tag attached to him or her. So these are all factors that are influencing decisions such as the decisions surrounding family planning, so on and so forth. Pardon me. So on to education, and education is going to be a clear and important element of this mass society, because by the late 19th century, in industrialized, developed nation states, universal elementary education will become increasingly the norm. And this, of course, means that all children will be expected and also have the privilege of gaining a public education. And this, of course, is different from Great Britain just decades before, when children were spending much of their childhood prime in the factories working and helping line the pockets of a rather wealthy capitalist class. The rationale for this significant commitment that many of these nation states make on behalf of public education is that by educating all children, essentially the environmental, the atmosphere surrounding these children, the norms, the expectations surrounding them will all improve. They'll become better informed citizens. We might be able to entrust more people with the vote if we have an informed citizenry. Also, they'll know right from wrong. They'll know about public hygiene. They'll know how to read and write and make contributions to society, so on and so forth. And as we all know, when you start publicly educating kids, you also you're not teaching them just reading, writing, and arithmetic. In most classrooms, teachers are modeling work ethic and rational, measured, critical thinking, proper hygiene, and how to interact with other people. Women are a really important part of this workforce. They, much as in their role as middle class and working class mothers, teachers are thought of as important aspects of imparting not just virtue, but in this case, knowledge and learning and the basics to another generation of children. Europe and North America, meaning the US and Canada, are going to tap into this universal education in a way that all but eliminates illiteracy. So we see large populations, a mass society of literate citizens who are capable of participating in a more meaningful way in the societies where they exist. And then newspapers are also going to develop in the background of this because, of course, if you have a fairly well-educated populace that reads, then you can start to circulate daily and other periodical newspapers or magazines. And of course, this is a critical way in which public opinion in a mass society can be formed because people start to read the same news articles, they start to hear the same comic strips, they see the same photos, and they're essentially being formed into, in some cases, a rather singular way of thinking about the world around them. And so newspapers and the media continue to have a pretty powerful influence, but that influence can really date back to, little over 100 years ago for most of the industrialized world. Finally, we'll close with mass leisure, and it's worth noting that as the second industrial revolution comes around, there's going to be a greater availability of leisure time. So the workday will be shortened, the work week will be shortened. The weekend begins by factory owners allowing their workers to knock off or end the work week early Saturday afternoon, say around 2 p.m. And then, of course, over time that will expand to eliminate work, or at least the traditional work week, to limit that, eliminate Saturdays altogether. And so, ta-da, suddenly we start to have this thing known as a weekend. And Saturdays and Sundays, this opens up a lot of activity and improves the quality of life. Again, Marx's predictions about the rising up and overthrowing of the industrial class or the capitalist class by the working class starts to look a little less likely when you see people getting more time off from their industrial jobs. Tourism becomes an important part of this. I mentioned earlier in the new cities we have things like trolley cars and electric transit. We're also going to see pretty cheap and reasonable opportunities for families, even working class families, to travel outside of town. In fact, this is going a little further. The working class wouldn't have participated in this, but we start to see train networks that access national parks in the American interior. So places like Yosemite National Park, Yellowstone National Park, Grand Canyon National Park. We start to see tourism become more of a mainstream focus of members of both European and American society. And then finally, team sports, key part of mass society, right? We build these big stadiums for things like baseball games and football games. And when you have tens of thousands of people who can go see a sporting event, of course, those tickets can be priced pretty cheaply because there's such a great supply of seats. And so this becomes a way in which people become a little more deeply enmeshed into a mass society where people, fan bases become, consist of, many members of a given city will have the same loyalties to their local baseball team. And this creates a sort of fun form of escape, but also a fun form of local identity and another way of finding meaning within an industrial complex that has, for the most part, left people wondering how they are different one from the other. All right, so we'll stop there and see you soon.